Hello, anatomy students. This video will be for talking about the ventricles in the brain. This is a model of those ventricles. Now, you may think that the ventricles are an actual structure, but this is actually a negative space model. So the space in the brain where cerebral spinal fluid is made and contained are the ventricles. So to visualize that, they had to make this negative space model. So imagine all this gray is just cerebral spinal fluid surrounded by many of the brain's structures. So just to visualize that, we can look at this model right here. So you can see this is the anterior portion of the ventricles, posterior portion, and you can see that the third ventricle would be around this intermediate mass right here. See this hole in the model? So it'd be right around here. This is where you have cerebral spinal fluid being made in the third ventricle. So this is all these little blue and red lines is the choroid plexus, which is a capillary bed that's making the cerebral spinal fluid from the blood. So this is an empty space called the third ventricle. That would be this right here. Now connected, the lateral ventricles would be on either side of the septum, number 8 here, septum pellucidum, and either side of that would be these lateral ventricles. You can see the septum pellucidum would be about right here. So right here, all your cerebral spinal fluid is being made. It's going actually all the way down into your arachnoid space of the spinal cord, and it's going into your brain. So it's acting as a way to collect waste or bring nutrients into the brain, into the spinal cord. Also, it acts as a kind of a barrier against any sort of shock absorption. It can be useful for that as well, up to a point. So now we kind of know where this is located. Let's kind of focus in on the model over here, and we'll look at all the structures that you need to know. We simplify this. You can talk about all the different parts of the lateral ventricle, but for the purpose of this class, we're just going to say that this is the lateral ventricle. All of this, lateral ventricle. Same thing with this side, lateral ventricle. And it will have its own choroid plexus, see, on either lateral ventricle, on either side. And that's depicted by the pink there. So that's the capillary bed that's making the cerebral spinal fluid. Then the third ventricle, this is right in the middle there, the intermediate mass connecting between the two hemispheres of the brain. The smallest connection between them is going through this little hole. This is the third ventricle. We're going to call this all third ventricle with its own choroid plexus. Now you may be wondering, how does the cerebral spinal fluid go from ventricle to ventricle? That's this right here, the interventricular foramen. That's this little passageway right there. There's one on either side, okay? Connecting between the lateral ventricles and the third ventricle. And then you'll have the fourth ventricle down here with its own choroid plexus, and that's connected to the third ventricle by the cerebral aqueduct right here. Okay, this negative space, that aqueduct going to the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle, you can see, if we go back to this model over here, so going down through the cerebral aqueduct right here into the fourth ventricle, okay? Now in the fourth ventricle, you'll notice on the model, there's these lateral apertures sticking out. So it's kind of going this way out of the model and then into the model. So the lateral apertures. The medial aperture is coming down like this. And that's this part right here, median aperture, coming down and in. I'm not able to see it too well, but lateral going to the lateral sides, median aperture going through the middle. And a little bit farther down here, kind of arching around. Okay, so those are the ventricles where cerebral spinal fluid is made. Here's that spinal cord model that we were looking at before. So going all the way down, if you look back in this model, going all the way down in the subarachnoid space around the spinal cord is where that cerebral spinal fluid will extend all the way down to. So it's pretty cool to see how far it extends down the body. It'd be right here, right outside the spinal cord. Okay, and I'll also have an answer key for this model on my website, so look out for that, and I'll see you in the next video.